this is actually much more of a story about his long intertwinement with Ghislaine Maxwell. This was on that same trip where he was accompanied by Kevin Spacey, Ghislaine Maxwell, and Chris Tucker, the guy from Rush Hour, who you may not remember. Famous crew.
I'm Detective Carter. Do you speak any English?
Politico Morning Consult actually did some useful work for us, which is that they actually commissioned a poll, and they asked Americans, how do you feel about cancel culture? Slightly more than a quarter of respondents just said that they didn't know or didn't have an opinion. I love the idea of just normal people living their lives. I'm like, what are you talking
What are you talking
And
about?
we're like, well, there's this letter, and
then there was another letter.
Then there was a counter letter.
And some of the people were hip and they left off Glenn Greenwald, and they'd be like, what are you talking
this
about?
dude at the New York Times is fired for publishing this op-ed, and they're like, yeah, but what does that have to do with my unemployment insurance? Anyway, if you're a corporatist neoliberal, you get to say whatever you want, right, in a conversation. Now, if you have contrary opinions like us, you kind of just smile and you sip your drink whenever somebody says something, you're like, yeah, right.
Right, that Russiagate thing.
Yeah, right, exactly. They'll be like, oh, Trump, and you're like, and you're like internally burning inside because you're like, you idiot, but you're like, no, you're not in the norms here. So 55% of people between 18 to 34 reported participating in cancel culture, while only 32% over 65 said the same. Willing to bet all of those people are on Facebook. So, it's that they agree with the things of which he strayed from his message, right? They're like, well, President Trump on Iran, or like President Trump on, internationalism, or keeping troops abroad, or cutting taxes and tax cuts, and you're like, whoa, I don't think anybody who is a Trump voter was like, yeah, let's vote for him so we can have war with Iran. That's absolutely not why they did that. So if you look at that,
That's why John Bolton voted for him, but everybody else.
Why.
President Obama's speech tonight slayed me. His warnings that we could potentially be at the end of American democracy.
No, I first of all, I'd just like to co-sign everything that Rachel Maddow just said, because I agree.
Oh my God.
Do you see a day when private insurance would go away, as you once proposed?
No, and in fact, my plan when I was running was that we would not eliminate private insurance. And
Even though you signed on for Medicare for all?
I signed on to that. I signed on to a number of bills that were about great ideas to fix the problem. I want to fix the problem, and Joe has a plan to fix the problem, and I'm fully supportive of it.
David, I think if I could just interrupt for just a moment. The degree to which we disagreed in the primaries was on tactic. We both believe Medicare, the health care is a right, not a privilege. And so I don't think we...
First of all, these people are so dishonest. I mean, she's like, well, private insurance. I never said private.
I forget what her plan was even called. It was like
Yeah, she didn't even come up with a catchy, like, Medicare for those who want it.
Yeah,
like Pete did,
I'm trying to remember. There were some hilarious ones. Monikers. It was like Medicare for Americans who want it.
She was a co-sponsor of Medicare for All. She ran Facebook ads to build her own list about how she was such a champion for Medicare for All. The moment donors were like, we're not down with that, she's like, me neither. What are you talking about? I was never for that. I have my own plan. It's nothing like Medicare for All.
Remember at that debate, whenever they asked.
But she didn't hear it, Saagar.
Yeah, she was like, I thought you meant eliminating my private health insurance. No, you didn't.
Okay.
That's the biggest lie. As we correctly reported, right, we talked about how that 1/3 drop in GDP is an annualized figure, and that the actual number was 10%, right? So you had people, some news outlets being reported the annualized figure as the actual drop. Well, a lot of them were out there being like, this is fake news. The economy only dropped by 10%. I was like, okay.
Oh, wow.
It is not the PR victory you think it is to be like, oh, actually the economy only contracted by 10.5%. It's like, that's still a lot. It's a catastrophe. That's still the biggest drop since the Great Depression.
Still the worst in history, you morons.
They are fine with a Democratic and Republican Party with George W. Bush, Paul Ryan, and Mitt Romney on one side, and Joe Biden, Barack Obama, and Hillary Clinton on the other. Those are the poles of acceptable conversation.
Yep.
And I remember this.
Which are like this,
yeah,
by
it's
the
like
way.
This. It's like the rest of the country is like here, and that's like here.
So what could they possibly make of wins by Jamal Bowman and Mondale Jones? That's to say nothing of progressive wins down ballot in DA races. Working Families Party and DSA candidates also appear to have knocked off maybe 3 or more Democratic incumbents in the New York State legislature. What could they do with the fact that Charles Booker may well overcome a nearly $40 million cash deficit to defeat Amy McGrath? the perfect corporatist middle-of-the-road candidate with the veteran trailblazer bio. She's everything they imagine that Kentucky voters could possibly want. And of course, AOC romped in her primary against an extraordinarily well-funded and well-publicized opponent. So faced with this slate of victories by candidates running on Medicare for All and the Green New Deal, many outright endorsed by the dreaded Bernie himself, how did they react? Let's take a listen.
It's tempting to read this as, progressives have, voters are looking for somebody that's more progressive, that's not part of the establishment. I think it's a little bit of a mistake to look at it that way. I think it's a rejection of the calcification of our politics, of people that have been in office for decades. In many cases,
see, guys, this has absolutely nothing to do with their progressive stances. That's not it at all, because of reasons and also because of other things. And so let's not learn the wrong lessons here. This is about people who have been in office for decades, but not like the way that Joe Biden's been in office for decades. That part is amazing and everyone loves it. You almost feel bad for them trying to come up with this stuff. Almost.
Some of you have accused me of being a traitor to my country, a Russian asset, a Trojan horse, or a useful idiot, I think was the term that you used. Which basically means that I'm naive or lack intelligence to know what's going on. Joy, this is why.
I mean, you're on Tucker Carlson at least 10 times. Why don't you go on
This is why I'm here, because you and other people continue to spread these innuendos that have nothing to do with who I am.
Colin, this whole thing has been nothing but good for Tulsi, and I thought she handled herself very well there.
Well, she did. She's very clearly comfortable under pressure. Maybe that has to do with her military experience, but I think these are kind of silly accusations, and I'm a little bit ashamed that the Democratic Party establishment hasn't backed her up more. She's a Russian plant because she goes on Fox News. That would make me one too. We're probably all here, Fox. We're all Russian plants.
It's one thing to try to open up a big tent. It's another to actually let people on the left and in the next generation into that tent in some meaningful way. Democrats are treating progressives and young people as cater waiters there to serve hors d'oeuvres to the Republicans, billionaires, and former office holders who are the real guests. Former advisor to Bill and Hillary Clinton, Richard Goodstein, joins us now. First of all, just react to that quote. I mean, we've had all kinds of Republicans. We had Kasich, we had Colin Powell, we're going to have Michael Bloomberg. Of course, both Clintons will be represented. And then this rising wing of the party, which is AOC and the other members of the squad, and some of the insurgent progressive candidates who just won in stunning upsets this election cycle, they're basically completely absent from the conversation. What do you make of that? Is that an intentional choice? Is it the right choice?
Look, Bernie Sanders got a very prominent role on night one, and to his credit, came out full-throatedly in support of Joe Biden. I think as much as anybody, that younger generation of activists looks to him, and he sent the signal, which he didn't do 4 years ago, look, do everything you can to get Joe Biden elected. So was this a slight of the younger crowd? Look, they had that interesting montage of 17 relatively young Democratic leaders last night give the keynote. That was kind of an effort to incorporate a younger group.
But none of them were progressive. They were all like, Connor Lamb, people who had endorsed Joe Biden early, basically was what qualified them as rising stars. So what I'm saying is not just about, yes, the youthful next generation, but there's a lot of people who voted for Bernie Sanders in this election cycle and last election cycle. This is where most of people in the party under 40 are ideologically aligned. And it feels like there's no real attempt to reach out to that group. I mean, is that ultimately a political mistake here, too?
Well, first of all, I disagree with the notion. If you look at the polls, Biden's actually doing quite well among younger voters right now relative to
Yeah, but he didn't in the primary, obviously, Richard.
Yeah, but he clobbered Bernie Sanders in the primary, okay?
Right, but not among young people. So if you're trying to win, those are the people that stayed home last time and you're very upset about, and it seems like similar mistakes are being made again about basically assuming you don't need that group, you don't need to excite them. They have no other choice, so they have to vote for Joe.
I don't think it's a question of not having any other choice. I think the issues, presumably, are what's going to speak to young people. If they care about climate change, if they care about health care, if they care about racial inequality, if they care about economic justice, this is not a close call. If they are indifferent and are perfectly happy with another 4 years of Donald Trump, yes, they will stay home. If they care about those issues, this is not a close call for them.
So let me ask you something, Rich. I want to go back to something you said earlier, where you famously come on our show, you said Bernie Sanders didn't do enough to get Hillary Clinton elected in 2016. So you are satisfied now at this point with Bernie's acquiescence to Joe Biden at the DNC?
I don't think it's an look, I think it's a genuine fondness. I give Joe Biden credit, frankly, something neither Barack Obama or Hillary Clinton had it was in their wheelhouse, to have these kind of interpersonal relationships with colleagues. And I think what you're seeing from Bernie Sanders, and again, my hat is way off to him for being unabashed in his support, no holds barred, for Joe Biden. So yes, I'm saying go for it, Bernie. I'm sure they're going to use him as much as possible. And my guess is, again, if the polls are any indication right now, Biden's doing quite well among younger voters.
The last thing I wanted to ask you about, which is another point that Rebecca Tracer made in a great piece over at The Cut, was that, while you point out there were a lot of women energized in 2018, there are a lot of first-time women candidates who won in 2018, by the way, none of whom, as far as I know, are featured at the DNC. But on the other hand, you have, in the Me Too era, Bill Clinton and Michael Bloomberg, both, credibly accused sexually harassers, getting prominent spots. How do you reconcile those things?
So I will take your or other people's ostensible interest in this sexual charges when I hear a smidgen of that coverage of the 20 women that are waiting for their day in court against Donald Trump, his bragging about having grabbed.
But Richard, I would flip that around, because we've certainly covered here. I know a lot of mainstream news has certainly covered those allegations as well.
No way.
But if Democrats are going to run on that issue, how do you reconcile that with still prominently featuring Bill Clinton and Michael Bloomberg?
I think Bill Clinton and Michael Bloomberg have shown themselves to be outstanding public servants. The economy never ever did better in terms of job creation than it did under Bill Clinton. Let me just say one other thing in that regard, if I can. Donald Trump says the best economy ever. Look at the stats of gross domestic product. He is a quarter of what it was under FDR.
But hold on, Richard. But hold on a second, because are you making essentially a utilitarian case here of we should ignore the Me Too transgressions because he was a good leader and the economy was good, and so we should just pretend that stuff didn't happen, or it's not relevant, or we should forgive him for it? What is the case you're actually making?
I don't think anybody's saying we should forgive anything. And look, he's mortified by his own behavior, again, if you watch that Hulu series. All I'm saying is that a reason to basically kind of throw somebody out of the party? I think the answer is no. I think people see him, warts and all. Look, I've heard a lot of people on cable news, sing Donald Trump's praises, but they can't, and think about all these women that we're talking about in Trump's case, and I guarantee you we haven't seen a speck of that coverage. So I just don't find it as a genuine criticism of Bill Clinton coming from a outlet for the news when there hasn't been anything like that coverage for the women as to whom Donald Trump, who are accusing him of misconduct.
Well, I think there's plenty of coverage of that. But Richard, we're going to have to leave it at that, unfortunately.